Sometimes silence is golden. If you take a look at the evolution of video games as a whole, you'll likely notice that we've been approaching a more cinematic term because we've seen budgets swell like my brain at the thought of trying to complete all of these new titles, and reams of dialogues just fall from the mouths of NPCs and protagonists and villains to such an extent that you're paddling in prose. And sometimes, don't you think it just gets a bit much, right? I mean, sometimes I don't want to watch, say a 2-hour cutscene, and instead I just want to pop on a bit of my own music and veg out to the sweet jams of not having to read a mountain of exposition to get what's going on. After all, I'm playing this game to not read a book or do something else. I mean, books are dumb after all. I kid, obviously. But today, let's pop down our dictionaries and our creative writing degrees that everyone and their dogs has and isn't worth as much as we think it is, and look at video games that created outstanding emotional moments without any dialogue whatsoever. So with this in mind, I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 powerful video game stories told without words. Before we begin, I do just want to intercept a complaint that some of you might raise. Yes, some of these games contain dialogue and writing, but the point of this is that the emotional moments didn't require any words whatsoever to take root within the player. And if you see anyone complaining about this, I don't know, just call them a colossal book nerd for me, alright? Because remember, books are dumb. They're not ready. Number 10, Florence. Releasing on smartphones in early 2018, Florence is as innovative as it is charming. The story follows protagonist Florence as she navigates the emotional whirlwind of falling in love, taking the player through her childhood dreams, the blissful side of romance, and an eventual breakup. The story of personal growth is presented without any words or dialogue in sight. Instead, it's the gameplay that tells the story, winding a clock with the swipe of a finger to demonstrate a time jump, tapping musical notes in sequence as Florence is swept away by tunes in the distance, or even having to construct a speech bubble out of a jigsaw to imitate the awkwardness of a first date. It is through these actions that the player truly immerses themselves in her world. And it's the insistence to keep the dialogue to a minimum, which is precisely why the narrative is so powerful, because you naturally come to feel as she does rather than being told what you are going to be experiencing. It's a clever and delightful game. Number 9, Faye. The under 4-hour runtime of 2018's Faye was clearly designed to provoke an emotional response from gamers in as short a time as possible. And you know what? For the most part, it bloody well succeeds. And why is that? Well, because any meaningful interaction between characters is done through song. Both parties holding a note unlocks new abilities and gameplay options as well as ways of traversing the map. With character interaction reserved for such things, Faye must look to other methods for continuing the story. What this boils down to is the game conveying emotion through other means, such as the use of shading of certain areas. Purples and lilac tones convey a feeling of safety, tranquility, and ambience. But when danger looms, the game will suddenly change to harsh, startling, and bright oranges. Without even knowing it, the player is informed of the dangers and trials ahead, and it's all done without wasting paper on a script. Number 8, Virginia. Virginia starts off with a lovely dose of crime noir, with Anne Tarver's first day as an FBI agent interrupted by the news of the disappearance of a young boy in a small town, which leads you and your partner to begin an investigation. Virginia's use of jump cuts from place to place or scene to scene superbly illustrates the pressure that the pair is under, as well as the stressful responsibilities of an FBI agent. Not a word needs to be said to instill a sense of urgency in the player, and no matter how quiet things may seem, there is no escaping the feeling that time is indeed against you. Again, colour is used to set an emotional base for the player, and you'll jump from expansive woodland areas full of rich greens and soft shadows to dark, dingy dive bars. It's a trip in the very literal sense of the word, but it's Virginia's willingness to change locations at a moment's notice that creates a true sense of unease that other crime games simply wish they could create. Plus, that score, it's brilliant. Number 7, Valiant Hearts. While the story presented in 2014's Valiant Hearts is connected by short segments of narration, and there are some pieces of dialogue here and there, its gut-wrenching tale is present in abundance during gameplay sections of continuous and prolonged silences. It's such a strange but beautiful game as well, using a cartoon art style that directly contrasts with the horrors of the First World War. It's a title that focuses on the human aspect of such a huge-scale event, showcasing friends, families, demise and the losses that everyone suffered. And despite the aesthetic, the colors are drab, the music is tragically melancholic, and the excellent sound design often incorporates eerie silences that illustrate just how unspectacular war can be. And it's here that you see how Valiant Hearts doesn't need scores of battlefields and a barrage of weaponry to tell a memorable war story. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Valiant Hearts leaves a lasting impression by reminding the player of the consequences of war on a personal level, and uses emotion rather than prolonged speeches to get this across. Number 6. Shadow of the Colossus. Destroy 16 colossi, wreaking havoc on the land to reclaim a loved one. Sounds pretty easy, right? Well, Shadow of the Colossus is anything but, as this title will toy with your emotions and your moral compass from the off. By turning the conventional game expectations on their head, the player is constantly questioning their actions, and by the end of this, you'll ask yourself, was it all worth it? And arguably, most of this weight is so impactful because there's no dialogue, and plunging the sword into each enemy's weak point is met not with swirling and majestic music or witty dialogue from the game's hero, but instead an ambient and almost peaceful melody as the massive foe hits the floor. With each successful kill, the feeling of guilt builds inside you until a point where it becomes devastating, and you'll probably leave this title with only 16 kills under your belt, but the guilt hanging over you as large as these beasts were. Number 5. The Legend of Zelda. Despite coining one of the most well-known lines in video game history being, "It's dangerous to go alone, take this," the hero of Hyrule's first outing in 1985 didn't have much in the way of a script. Dialogue was included in the game, but the immense sense of adventure and the satisfaction of collecting each of the Triforce fragments, they weren't conveyed in any writing. Instead, they were bolstered by the iconic overworld theme and freedom of exploration that the series has since returned to in 2017's Breath of the Wild. It's easy to critique the Zelda series for its recycled narrative with hindsight and scores of new titles, but it had to start somewhere, and while it was clear what endpoint you needed to work towards, the sense of freedom within the original game allowed players to create their own narrative. This is arguably why The Legend of Zelda was so embedded in the video game industry, as it was one of the first games to really push the idea of a world to lose yourself in, rather than have everything fed to you as the developer intended. Number 4. Old Man's Journey. After receiving a letter, an old man embarks on a personal journey over hills, past old towns, and through great bodies of water. This simple point-and-click adventure has a charming soundtrack and simple hand-drawn aesthetics that, when paired with its story, are a real treat. Manipulating the scenery and navigating the surroundings with a swipe of a finger, the landscape you traverse offers plenty of reminders to the man of his past life. Each time he encounters a landmark or a place to rest, the player is gifted a small glimpse at his time with his significant other, as well as the life that he once led. And yet the story is most impactful when there's nothing but silence as you watch one of his memories play out, and it conveys its importance to him. Because by the end of this adventure, it will also be important to the player. It is a beautiful game for sure. Number 3. Gris. While it's not completely dissimilar to other games on this list, indie title Gris does well to invoke a feeling within the player despite its minimal approach to writing and sparing use of dialogue. Not only does it present a powerful story through art and music alone, it relies on it to tell the tale of the titular character who has lost their voice. And it's her early realization of this fact that results in the game's first powerful moment. From this moment, the soundtrack becomes her voice, her means of conveying tone, distrust, awe, shock, passion, and most prominently, loss. The lack of words does naturally mean that the game doesn't have a clear focus throughout, but the atmosphere that it does create is one that allows the player to infer their own meanings and backstories to, thereby making it a game that gives you more the more you put into it. Number 2. Journey. It's hard to make sense of Journey's story, but there's no escaping its emotional weight. Playing as a lone adventurer with no backstory and no noticeable character traits, the player sets off on, a journey throughout vast deserts and perilous snowstorms, enduring immense struggle as the light in the distance inches closer. It's clear that the developer intended for the player to draw their own conclusions from its 2-hour runtime, and if they've been paying attention, they'll do just that. There are so many individual moments in the game game that say something incredibly poignant despite stubbornly maintaining its silence. The implementation of another wanderer who was actually a real-life player into the mix early on to help you evokes a feeling of harmony, and the difficult ascent up the mountain throughout the barrage of snow and high winds makes the persistence feel worth it when you finally reach the summit. The minimalist approach to gameplay mechanics provides focus, as there isn't a plethora of button combinations needed to progress. Instead, Journey's simple design and tranquil surroundings allow for its story to become a memorable one. And number 1, Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons. At its core, Brother: A Tale of Two Sons is about family. The journey the two boys must undertake is a sizable one, a trek across a varied landscape to save their dying father, and you know what? It is as sad as it is engaging. Even its startup screen showcasing a boy kneeling beside a lone gravestone sitting atop a cliff adds to the dark tone and wastes no time pulling the player into its narrative. Instead of colours and score, it's the character animations that tell the tale to the player in a way that words alone would struggle. Now, true, the brothers do speak to each other, but it's in a language unknown to the player, and thus they have to rely on the body language to gauge tone and feeling. It also manages to do something that other games on this list haven't really done, and that's use game mechanics to convey a message. With the player controlling one brother on each thumbstick, we get to experience the difficulty of wrangling two different personalities and how they must work together in order to progress. It's a truly unique concept, and one that really does create a powerful experience. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 powerful video game stories told without words. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. If you want to chat to me further about all things video games and film, TV, wrestling, whatever, you can do so at RetroJ with a 0. But before I go, I just want to say one thing, and that was how this entire script focused on video game stories that were told without words. But that shouldn't ever take away the importance of using your words to let others know how you are. Don't feel like you have to suffer in silence. Don't feel like you can't share your problems with people that are close to you, because trust me, we all care about you and want you to do well. It may be very hard to set up a dialogue in the first place when you are talking about something that is negative or very difficult to express, but trust me, with patience and understanding and to let others help you, you might find that your problems are much more easily solved. Now go out there and smash it, you big lad. As always, I've been Jules, you've been awesome, never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.